So good evening and welcome. We're so excited that you are here. My name is Karen Claich. I am a retired educator. I work with the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust, and I am a teacher fellow with the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. And Laurie, I would love for you to introduce yourself, please.
Hello, excuse me. Hello, my name is Laurie Shaffer, and I am an English teacher at Mount Tabor High School in Winston-Salem. Yes, we are that Mount Tabor High School of not so good fame right now. But I teach both English 2 as well as a course on the Holocaust, and I am a museum teacher fellow as well. I enjoy working very much with Karen, and I'm also a member of the council, and very happy to be here with you tonight in partnership with one of my favorite places in the world, the Holocaust Museum.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So tonight is the first of a 2-part program entitled Remember, Reflect, and Respond. And this program has been planned in connection and cooperation with the museum's Conference for Holocaust Education Centers program. And now I would like to introduce the director of the CHEC program for the museum, Christina Chavarria.
Thank you so much, Karen, for that very, for just the lovely mention of the program. And also thank you to Laurie. My name is Christina Chavarria, or you can call me Chris for short, that's fine. And like Karen and Laurie, who are not only two wonderful colleagues, but two very dear friends for several years, I'm also a museum teacher fellow, not from North Carolina, but from El Paso, Texas, my city of birth, and that's also where I taught for 9 years. And I just want to thank everybody on the council who has supported this 2-part workshop. As Karen mentioned, the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust is part of the CHEC program at the museum. But I do want to say that our relationship actually goes further back with North Carolina and teachers in North Carolina with the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. We've had a very long-standing relationship with the North Carolina Center for the Advancement of Teaching, NCAT. And through there, we were able to first meet many teachers who are now part of the Museum Teacher Fellowship Program. I see Juanita is here. Good to see you, Juanita. And also we've been in contact, and we've done some work with the North Carolina Council. I also see Tali's here. Tali, it's good to see you. Tali also came to our Belfair program. I remember that. So we have a very strong relationship with North Carolina, but we've really cemented it even more through the CHEC program and working with the council. So even though we've done work together, this is an opportunity to really solidify that relationship, to look at the goals that the council has for teacher professional development, and then to look at the resources that we produce at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum and how those resources can help to fit the goals to support all of you in teaching about the Holocaust, whether that's by looking at legislation or looking at your own rationale that you've established for teaching. So I just also want to say one more thing, and that is a huge thank you to all of you educators, especially in what has been an incredibly challenging 18 months. I mean, I can't even begin to imagine what you faced through the last 18 months. Teaching is a challenging job anyway, but the fact that you're still here and you're here tonight really means the world. So thank you.
It does. Thank you, Chris. So in just a few minutes, we're going to go to the breakout session. And so while Laurie is working on putting you into groups, we're going to review the 3 questions that we sent you in the email. And we are supposed to have facilitators, Laurie, if you need me to read you those names, if you want to do that. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The questions,
Go ahead, Karen.
Okay. So 3 questions. Tell us why you're here without telling us why you're here, right? 140 characters or less. I'm here because, well, I'll do that in my group. Anyway, second question, in your role, in your classroom role, in your education role, why high quality Holocaust education? What does it look like to you? What do your students need? What do individuals or communities, how can they benefit from this? And then in your, again, in your area of the state, what are the challenges that you face? What are the resources that you need? And this is where partnership with the museum is going to be something that we can really look forward to because of the Never Again Education Act. And I'm sure Chris will speak to that later. But that's what they want to know too. What resources and challenges do we face? How can they help us meet those demands? So you're going to spend about 15 minutes talking, sharing ideas. This is not a professional academic, whatever. It's we want you to feel free to talk about things that are concerning you with Holocaust education in your part of the woods, neck of the woods, so to speak. So Laurie, are we ready for that?
Well, in the grand vein of pretending like we're in the classroom and preparing for the fact that the breakout room tab is not available on our Zoom call right now.
Okay.
We're going to adjust because that's what we do.
We pivot and adjust. That's right.
Yes. So we actually only have 23 people on the call. Karen, what do you think?
Okay.
Maybe just having like everybody kind of share those things together as a whole group.
That sounds great. That sounds great.
Well, then why don't you start us off? Because you were about to say something.
Because I was about to say something, and that's what happens when you become my age and then you forget what you were going to say. So why am I here? Without telling you why I'm here, I am here because, gosh, I am so sorry. Because because this is why I moved to Raleigh. I'm doing this. This is why I'm here. That's not a great one. I'll keep thinking. Laurie, next person. I don't think well off the top of my head. Go. Who's next?
You want me to go next?
Sure.
Hi, everyone. I'm Talit Katan, and I'm here because my goal is to honor Holocaust survivors. All 4 of my grandparents were survivors. I don't know if that tells you why I'm here without telling you I'm here, but that's what I've got tonight. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Talit. Okay, David, I'm going to just start calling on people.
That'll work. I'm here because it's the most important thing I can think of to do.
Yeah. Thank you. Joyce?
Joyce Williams.
Hi, Joyce.
Hi, I'm here because I just never want to forget what happened. I don't want to forget that part of history.
Thank you. April?
Hey, so I'm here because I don't want to see things like that happen to people ever again.
Thank you. Carla?
I'm here because I have an entire group of sophomores just waiting for me to give them a reason to listen to me each day and try to keep their attention from the TikTok videos to more
Yes.
work matters.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Carla. Amy?
I'm here because I need a better world for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Karen? Hi, Karen. Love your name.
So I actually wrote it down and checked on how many characters I had.
Oh, I was kidding. That's okay.
This is why I'm here. Oh, well, no, can't say that. Camp Auschwitz sweatshirt. A colleague of mine was recently called a kike by one of his high school students. And congressional members' anti-Semitic comments. And Chana Senesh and resistance.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Wendy?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm here for a number of reasons, but because kids need to know, they just need to know about the past and how it relates to the present. And they need to understand that the things that they say and do have meaning.
Yep. What you do matters, right? From the museum. Kinsey and Christina, this is, one of our other MTFs in North Carolina. Kinsey's becoming involved with us. We're happy.
Hey.
Hey.
Because my students don't understand, and we need to gain more empathy in our world.
Great. Thank you, Kinsey. Suzanne?
So I even Googled like how to come up with a tell me why you're here without telling me why you're here. And it's really hard for this one.
It is.
So my silly one was going to be, I'm here because I'm in between shows that I'm binge watching on Netflix. But my serious one is just because I can't stop learning, and this is too important to not learn about.
Right, right. Thank you. Chris?
I'm here for my daughters and my students to help build empathy for others in my community, and to also carry on the legacy of my wife's grandmother, who had a really important story to tell.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, David.
Hey, how you doing? I apologize, everybody. My name should say David Clevin under my window, but in my haste to get in here,
No worries.
My login, and
no worries.
I can't change it now. Hi, I'm David Clevin. I'm an education outreach specialist at U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and I am here along with Christina Chavarria because I want to do everything I can to support the teachers of North Carolina, the administrators and the curriculum supervisors who support them. And so it's a pleasure to meet everyone, and I look forward to hearing everybody's thoughts on today's workshop.
Great. Thank you, David. We're so glad to have you here with us. Lissa?
I am here because because kids need to learn from the stories of the Holocaust, because they need empathy now more than ever, and because I'm afraid of Holocaust education not being as robust in our present and future. It can't be robust enough.
Thank you. Laurie Jones? Hi, Laurie.
Hi, how are you? Can you hear me?
Yes.
When I saw some of the statistics about just how many young adults and teenagers had no idea what the Holocaust was, I agree with what everybody else said. We need empathy now more than ever, and we also need to make sure that the story continues, that these kids, the younger generations need to learn this. We need to never forget.
Thank you, Laurie. Melanie?
Hi, everybody. My name is Melanie Diorio. I'm here both as an educator and a graduate student studying Holocaust and genocide studies. So I'm here to become a better educator and become a better student and learner as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Angela?
Hey Hey.
Hi.
I'm struggling with my features today, and not to sound redundant, but I just had this conversation with my coworkers today that our kids need empathy more than ever, and I know that I can do a better job of relaying this information to them. So that's why.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Chris? Chris.
Hey guys, how are y'all? Sorry, I have my son with me.
Okay.
Apologize for the background noise. I am here to better educate myself so I can better educate others to not forget and prevent from ever repeating.
Thank you. Let's see, Sarah.
I don't know if I can say anything that hasn't already been said, but as a middle school teacher, as I watched the kids tear each other down and the different groups, they isolate each other. They're just vicious. And I want to be able to make correlations between what's happening in our world today and what was allowed to happen in the past. And I think this generation of middle schoolers maybe they don't know the history. So I want to make sure that they know it so they can stop tearing everybody else down.
Right. Thank you. Christy?
Hey, everybody. There we go. I am here because, like Sarah, I'm also a middle school teacher. I'm here as an educator and as a Jew. And I also, I think it's really important that our students make connections to what's going on in our world today or more recently, even if it's not current, to see that never again, it's not a never. And that we have ways to try to be part of keeping the never away. So that's fine.
Great. Thank you. Juanita?
Wow, you're gonna make me talk. Okay. Sorry, I was listening intently, Karen. I wasn't paying attention. Okay, so to tell you why I'm here without telling you why I'm here. Because it is a calling and I am disturbed by patterns I see around me.
That's good. That's a good one. Thank you so much. Vicki, did you want me to read yours or do you want to share it?
I'm pretty sure that Vicki does not have the ability.
Oh, that's right. That's right. She doesn't. So she said, my name is Vicki. I'm a retired North Carolina public school teacher. I'm here because I did not learn about the Holocaust until I was an adult. I want to encourage our current teachers to teach our students the lessons of the Holocaust. Yes. Thank you, Christy, for reminding me of that. There's another Joyce. Is that correct? Do we have two Joyces here or was I confused again? Okay. Sabrina. I think you're the last one.
Hi, I'm Sabrina. I'm an exceptional children's teacher, so I want to be able to answer the questions that my students are coming in asking me, and I want to answer them, to create more interest so that they will be more interested and want to learn more.
Great. Laurie, Chris, did you want to join in? We're going to have to kind of compact the next two questions, I think.
Yeah, sure. I'm here because I have seen hate in action recently, and there is a way that we can stop it. And I think that this is one of the ways we can do it.
Thank you, Laurie.
I'm here because there is so much unfolding history on this theme on teaching the Holocaust and Holocaust memory and Holocaust studies that it may sound cliche, but it's very true that the more you know, the more you realize what you don't know.
Right.
And I think that just is what encourages us. One of the many things that encourages me to keep learning. I probably used more than 140 words. Sorry.
It's okay. So I think we kind of, a lot of us touched on your classroom, your education role, why high quality Holocaust education is important. You all have mentioned a lot of things that are happening in the news and communities. And we all can, I think, can see the need for high quality Holocaust education. But what are the challenges then you face within your communities, in your areas? What are the resources that you feel like we could do a better job in providing? How can we help you? And I'm just going to kind of let anybody speak that wants to do that instead of going through all. We have about 9 minutes or so before we need to transition. So
I'll just say the lack of contact with the Jewish community in Gaston County. So I'm looking forward to the rabbi tonight to maybe get some connections, because I've never taught, I've been doing this for 7 years and have never taught a Jewish student. Most of my kids don't know a Jewish kid. So I think this will help a lot.
Great.
I would echo that, Karen, being in the western region of the state, very isolated here with a lot of students who don't even know Jewish terminology and probably have never spoken with someone, in that faith. There might be a few that have, but very, very few. Very isolated here in Western North Carolina. And for those of you who don't know, Clay County is at the very end, right by Cherokee County, and we're about 2 hours from any major city.
Thank you, Carla. So what do you see? What are challenges? What are resources?
I'll say a challenge I think that we have, and I don't know that this is necessarily easy to solve, but the pressure to, there's a whole lot of pressure to do a whole lot of things in a whole little bit amount of time. And so it is when you're feeling all that to prioritize what you know is best for students and important to learn. I just think time is a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess anything that is easy to implement but powerful is helpful.
And that helps you to make sure that you're covering your standards and your objectives and so forth.
Right.
I think one challenge as we educate the young people about the subject of the Holocaust, we need to also make sure that we're educating our teachers. I grew up in New York around a Jewish community, but it wasn't until I moved to the South and became a teacher here, my first year teaching, I experienced the most horrible statement from another teacher that said to me, "That's why you all used to sit in the back of the bus." And coming from another colleague and coming from another educator, that really shaped my entire career and helped me to understand, not only what career I had actually chosen, but what I might even face, not necessarily from the young people, but from my peers. So we have to make sure that, as we delve into this, and I know our heart is with the kids, but we have to also make sure there are a lot of our peers that don't even want to entertain this topic and entertain this part of history. So that's a challenge, because kids are malleable. We can bend them, we can shape them, depending upon what stage in life we reach them, in elementary or middle or whatever. But it's hard. It's hard to change the heart, of an adult. And so I think that's definitely a challenge we're gonna have to first acknowledge, and then we're gonna have to begin to shape and change.
Absolutely. We want high quality Holocaust education. We know we've got challenges, and we do have to wrestle with the kind of learning and the kind of teaching necessary to meet our students where they are in their learning, because certainly for middle school students, they're going to be at a different place. But Joyce, I think you're right too, and to have conversations with teachers, because some teachers are uncomfortable about teaching this. Some teachers don't feel like they have enough background knowledge for this. And so these are areas where we would like to help and be a part of that process and being able to share resources with us. So we're going to be starting kind of our program tonight with remembering, right? We're going to be remembering and heading into the reflecting part of this, you know, thinking about where prejudice can lead. Again, what kind of learning does it take to combat this? In North Carolina, we're working very hard to build a coalition of Holocaust educators across the state where we remain connected and we share ideas and resources with one another. Do we need to build a coalition of student advocates kind of in the same way? And remember, they have a voice, but they may not know how to use that voice or what to do. So there's a lot to consider with this. And Melanie, you wanted to contribute. What did you say? In April, yeah. Ability to teach accurate history without pushback from stakeholders. That's always a challenge. And April writes a lot of pressure to teach the curriculum. Will be nice when the bill passes. Well, we hope that's going to happen. There are a lot of variables in play right now. So we're just going to continue on doing what the council's been doing for 40 years, which is trying to meet the needs of the teachers with quality pedagogy and resources. So Laurie, I'm going to let you take it to the next step.
Thank you, Karen. And thank you guys for that discussion, because I feel the same things you're talking about, the challenges that we face. And I really want to echo what you said, Melanie, of how to teach accurate history without pushback from stakeholders, especially with all of the recent things about critical race theory and all of those things. We're just going to say it because that's what's one of the things that's driving some of the challenges in North Carolina at the very least. And so that's something that we as a council are also working on ways to figure out how to address that and equip our teachers with accurate history. But one of the other ways that we can do that too is, as some of you mentioned, where you don't have Jewish communities or you've never taught a Jewish student and your students really don't understand Jewish culture. And when you read Knight or you read Anne Frank or you read any other text, memoirs or anything, when you're talking about Holocaust and you yourself don't know the traditions and the culture and what was lost truly during the Holocaust, remembering what was lost and reflecting on that. One of the most wonderful things that I've ever had happen in my classroom is to have the rabbi from Winston-Salem, Temple Emanuel, come into my classroom before COVID, back in the day. He would come physically into my classroom. And I'm really excited that he's here with us tonight. My students have loved learning from him. Their eyes were open. They asked great questions, and he could tell you all about it for a very, very long time. But he's here tonight to be able to talk to you about some of those things that we want to remember and make sure that we pass on to our students, especially those of us in communities that are so isolated. And he's here to answer your questions as well. So he's going to speak for a bit. And then if you're thinking about any questions specifically that you have for him, we'll have about 10 minutes when he's done to be able to do that. But the Jewish community in Winston-Salem has been wonderful in supporting our school, and we've supported them right back. And it has been a really, really good partnership. So if you do have a Jewish community, definitely reach out, because they have always, everyone that I've talked to and been involved with, they're always welcoming and want to be part of the fabric of the education in their community as well. So Rabbi Marc, I'm going to turn it over to you to let you work your magic, and then we'll answer some questions here at the end. So that's your fabulous introduction, and take it away.
Good evening to everybody. Laurie, thank you for that introduction. I think it's great for me to start at 7:30 on a weeknight after you've already been working. I'm sure that I will clearly be able to keep you all awake. And if your screen is off, I can't say I blame you entirely. But I do want folks to, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. I'll do my best to kind of monitor it as we're going along and try to address, and hopefully what I say has a good level of relevancy. I have to say, before going to rabbinical school to study to be a rabbi, I was on path to become a high school history teacher, because the truth of the matter is I actually knew that would hit a lot more people, but okay, I stayed in my own people, and that's hopefully I'm doing all right. But I am a huge proponent. I'm very grateful for the work that you all do. There's just nothing easy about it. And I'm very grateful for our teachers. My own kids have been a product of our schools here in Winston-Salem. And Laurie, of course, I'm sure you have followed and seen what's gone with Mount Tabor High School in the last month. And we have some of our Temple kids who are there, and students over the years who have been Laurie's students, and speak with such gratitude and praise for her and for the teacher. So really, my heart is open to all of you. And I'm really grateful that you do the work that you do, and that you're willing to take on the Holocaust and bring that in, because that there would be one of the weightier subjects that people are going to have to talk about. And for us as Jews, of course, we're going to talk about the Holocaust. We need to. That is our story, though it is not unique to us as Jews, right? When we think about the 6 million Jews who died, okay, well, so there's another 5 million people who were targeted and tagged and literally hunted down, murdered, gays and lesbians and people of the Roma, and it just so many disabled, political folks who are opposed. But our story as Jews in those war years in the Holocaust, that's possible because of the system of how Jews were living in Europe for the 1,000 years before, where we were just, I was in my family, on my dad's side, we come from what is now part of Poland, and on my mom's side from Romania, parts of what's Romania now, and parts of what's been Austria, or part of Poland. There was, and again, and if I'm saying things that don't make sense, again, just put something in the chat or wave the white flag of surrender, and I will try to explain. Jews starting, and I'm going to hopefully get it about right, in the 17th century are forced to live in parts of Central and Eastern Europe. It's called the Pale of Settlement. So effectively, most North American Jews today come from that world. So my family is coming in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and we come from that area. And I'm interested, I'm reading a book right now, which we're going to have the author speak at Temple in November. Her name is Julie Metz. She wrote a book called Eva and Eve. It's remarkable how there's always more books being published on the story of what happened in the Holocaust. I really recommend it, among others, because it's going to give you to go into what happened from 38 to 40 in Austria and in Vienna in particular. And again, so for us to tell the story, it makes sense. But for non-Jews to tell the story, for it to be told in the high schools, for church groups, we have groups that come to Temple. It's so important because this is a human story as well. And this is what happens to us as humans. People will ask the question often, and of course, there are a lot of people who survived who gave up on God, who gave up on Judaism. Because after all, being Jewish, belief in God, like what good did that ever get us? Look at what it got us. And I would not be one to argue with a survivor or a child of a survivor. And yet, there was a wonderful man who was one of my teachers, who himself was a refugee from Germany. He was ordained as a rabbi in 1935 in Berlin. He was en route to be one of the great rabbis of his day. And then, of course, the war. And he came to America, and he was a rabbi here in the States. He had retired in Tampa, where I was serving in my first pulpit as a rabbi. And he would give a sermon, or one of his main talks, he would say, the question is not where was God? The question is where was man? That if we don't, for the most part, particularly in post-Holocaust theology, look and say, yes, the God we meet in the Bible seems to be very manipulative and really kind of controlling things. But certainly post-Holocaust, but it's not unique to post-Holocaust theology and Jewish life. The question is, God is inside of us. We're all created in the image of God. Check out Genesis 1. But what do we do with that godliness inside of us? Well, we as humans have a heck of a way of hurting one another. And for us as Jews, we have been kicked around, targeted, murdered, sought after to be killed, exiled, during the course of our history, most notably with the destruction of the first temple in the year 586 before the Common Era in Israel and Jerusalem. When the Babylonians had taken over, it happens to the Romans in the year 70. And then we look at our dispersion in different places where we lived, sometimes more comfortably than other times. And so to recognize that Holocaust story, this is the Jewish experience of it. But that story happens elsewhere, which is why if you study or go to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, they've done incredible exhibits about other types of genocides that have happened around the world. So your task, as I can imagine, is to tell the story of the Holocaust, but also set it in part of human history. How am I doing? Is this along the lines of what y'all need? We're good? All right. So when I go to talk to kids about it, like in Laurie, in your class, I think Judaism has the best show and tell. I think we we've had about 3,000 years to master this stuff, so that's pretty good. But it is our ritual items that tell a lot of our stories, or our holiday times that tell our stories. So right now you are finding me on one of my happiest nights of the year. Why, you may ask? Because we just finished 3 solid weeks of holidays, right? These are, people often call them the high holy days. They're very, very important in the Jewish calendar. How do we know we're supposed to do these? Because it's in the Torah, meaning the 5 books of Moses. So it started 3 weeks ago, last night, which is Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year. 10 days later comes Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. 5 days after that, we create these shelters at the temple in our parking lot. People do it in their home, in their backyard, and they're to remember the Exodus from Egypt. We do that for a week, and then there's an 8th day of gathering, of celebration. That was today. We also mark the annual cycle of our reading the Torah. It takes us a whole year to read through the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. And one of the teachings I just gave today is that when we think about what does it mean to be Jewish, we are forever holding history with us. If you came to our temple and you walk into our lobby of our sanctuary building, we have 2. We have an education building and we have our sanctuary social hall building. If you were to walk into the lobby of our building, what greets you? Well, there's this big stone wall that is to remind you of the Western Wall in Jerusalem, to remember our people and our connection to our people's modern and ancient land. And there's this kind of like it's a little ark. It's a little, not Noah. I mean, that's part of our Torah too, but it's an ark, like a little closet, so to speak, only it stands alone. And you open it up and there's a Torah inside. We keep our Torah typically on the eastern wall, which is where we direct our prayers towards the east, towards Israel. And so on the eastern wall, we have our Torahs that are beautiful and they're dressed, and we take them out to read from them. This Torah that's in our lobby that welcomes you is actually open, which is already unusual, and it doesn't have decoration on it. And in fact, it's in such bad shape that it really should be buried, which is what we do with ritual objects that are no longer fit for use. Like a person that we consider holy, so we consider our Torahs, our prayer books, certain ritual items. If God's name is mentioned on it or in it, we bury them. We give them proper burial. And so this Torah really should be buried because it's in such bad shape. It's deteriorated. And so you understand how a Torah is made. It's made from animal skin, typically a kosher animal, like a cow. And it takes a long time to write. You can imagine a scribe has written this thing in a Torah that is well cared for, can last, I'm not making this up, can last about 1,000 years if it's well, it was created well, it's preserved well, used well, it'll last a good long time. This Torah comes from Czechoslovakia. And Torahs are not dated or signed, so we really don't know where it's from exactly or who the scribe was who scribed it. I mean, we know who the author, capital A, author of Torah is, God, but we don't know who the scribe was who actually wrote it. But much the way an art historian can look at a piece of art and say, oh, that's Renaissance from this school in Italy or whatever, so a scribe can look and say, oh, that's a Czechoslovakian Torah from the 19th century. That's from Baghdad in the 16th century. This is North African. This is Italian. Okay. So this Torah is a Czech Torah. We can tell because of the parchment and because of the hand that wrote it, but it's part of a remarkable story. If you ever get a chance to look up, and it's easy to Google and find. Of course, now you're going to want to go do that. I asked you just to do it after. It's called the Czech Memorial Scroll Trust. there was an art dealer in England who would travel into Europe and buy various wares and things and sell them. And he had traveled to Prague. This is in the 1963. And I'm probably going to get the story a little bit messed up. It's on my blog and our Temple website. He goes to Prague and he's visiting there. And one of the art dealers he's working with says, oh, there's this warehouse of a bunch of scrolls you might be interested in. It's 1963. He goes, he looks, and he knows right away what these are. They're Torah scrolls by the hundreds. And so he goes back to London. He works with the Westminster Synagogue in London. And in 1964, he returns and there were about 2,000 scrolls. They took about 1,500 of them and brought them to the Westminster Synagogue in London. They became known as the Czech Memorial Scroll Trust. They had been cataloged by Jews because Jews knew what they were, and they were being housed by the Nazis. And the Nazis, as you know, kept meticulous records on all kinds of things. Most of the Torahs had a tag on it. They or literally had a tattoo, not unlike the people, that would say where it was from. And the Jewish communities from whence they came after the war, most of them had been devastated and destroyed, or those who had survived moved to Israel, to the United States, or elsewhere. So the Czech Memorial Scroll Trust becomes the owners of these 1,500-ish scrolls, and then they make it their effort and their mission to get these Torahs out into Jewish life in congregations where life is happening. We have one of those Torahs. And that's what greets you when you come into our building. And it is from a town called Klatovy. There were about 10 scrolls that came from this little town. The Jews were numbered about 500. They were rounded up by the Nazis in 1941. All but about 50 of them died during the war in the camps. And so there's no way you can't exactly send that Torah back. This was a Jewish community that had flourished. It was not always terribly big, but in the 1800s, it started to really grow. A community that has 10 Torahs, that tells you a little something about the wealth of the community and the number of people in the community. And it's a beautiful hand that wrote it, that particular scroll. So that's what greets us. Now, we don't live because of the Holocaust. There's an Israeli philosopher of the last century, Emil Fackenheim, who said there's 613 commandments in the Torah. Fackenheim said there's a 614th commandment. That's what we say in Yiddish. That's a little chutzpahdik. That's having a lot of nerve to come along and say, well, there's another commandment. Well, what Fackenheim says is, don't give Hitler any posthumous victories. Don't give Hitler any posthumous victories. Which is a challenge to us in the post-Holocaust era to say, I'm not a Jew because of the Holocaust. I carry that story though with me. And I try to teach Judaism and make it meaningful and relevant for our age because of who we are, because of what our tradition has been for 3,000 years. But I sure want to make sure I do my part to keep our people moving forward and not let someone and those who would hate or detract from us win, which is why when we see anti-Semitism in this, which we do on a regular basis, sadly, and it takes various forms from the right. If we want to look on a political spectrum, it comes from the right, it comes from the left, it comes from ignorance, it comes from those who know. What that does to me and what I'll teach, it just makes me want to be more Jewish. You want to come after me? Great. Now, it's not always been so easy to do that. And for my ancestors, and you listen to this book that I'm telling you about or read it, Eva and Eve, no, we've had to hide who we were any number of times. I know people who came from that world, who were refugees, who came out before it was too late, or who survived and came and who live in this area. And they converted to Christianity, or they simply hid their being Jewish because they were afraid. And that is very real, literally as we speak today. People who have grown up, and now what's really interesting is I'm working with a couple of people who are the grandchildren. So they're in their 20s, 30s. They're the grandchildren of some of those refugees. And they say, you know, we said there was Judaism, and I did a DNA test. And sure enough, they're Ashkenazi Jewish. And they start looking and they start tracing. And so they want to become Jewish, and that's it. So we have the story in us, but we live Jewish because we're Jewish, and that's where we move. So when we think about what the Nazis were doing, why did they target us? What's the matter with us? On the one hand, everyone loves a good scapegoat, and the Jews work really well for that, because we've always been a marginalized people, and we weren't allowed to do the same trades or the professions as others, or we would do the things that nobody else wanted to do when we were forced to do that, whether it's money lending or different things, all kinds of tests that we're seen as secondary. Well, who likes a money lender? Like, that's just not real common that you're going to like the person who you owe money to, and then when that person might have the nerve to come and look for that money, well, all of a sudden that person's nothing but greedy and is nothing but a pariah on society. And so that's part of, the anti-Semitism is rich in its variations as to why it happens. So when the Holocaust hits, the German Jews, what's a remarkable statistic is that the German Jews actually fared better than the Polish Jews. The Polish Jewish community was destroyed, almost 90% of it. What was with the German Jews? I have one of my father's uncle was born in Berlin in 1920. Jewish only child, family had some means, and they were able to get out. They also looked German. They spoke German. But for the Polish Jews, who tended to live much more in ghettos and concentrated areas, it was much harder to get out. They looked Jewish. They were known who they were. And you may hear stories about that after the war, when those Jews who did survive in Poland and Ukraine and elsewhere, what were they met with? Not with cheers of, oh, it's great, I'm glad you survived. It's, what are you doing here, and why didn't Hitler finish the job? We'll do it for him. And so that strain of what happens to our people where we get targeted, it leads to generational trauma. We know that. And why we as Jews are forever, we're looking back. We can't help forget. We're also commanded not to forget evil in the world, but we're always ready, God forbid, to have to move. And what makes the American Jewish experience unique for us is we have been more accepted in the last, I really just temper it, just in the last 50 to maybe 60 years, we've been more accepted than almost anywhere in Jewish time, period. When I mentioned about my family coming in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there's a significant law that gets passed in 1924 by the Congress that is targeting Jews, Italians, other immigrants from Europe, but they were more than happy to really target the Jews to keep immigrants out. It was an America First language, nativist language that was used, and that's why we as Jews tend to get very anxious when people start talking about immigration quotas and not allowing people in. It doesn't necessarily mean we're all for like free borders, but we know what it is to be kicked out and to be marginalized and to be targeted, that you can't come in. And when the quotas were so strict, that's why Jews couldn't get out. If you read the story of the St. Louis, which was this horribly ill-fated ship that had left from Europe. Hopefully I get the year about, it's about 1941, and they come. And they literally make it all the way to Cuba. Cuba won't take them. They can see the lights of Miami. A lot of you, I'm seeing some head nod, right? And they go back, and that's quotas. That's the result of quotas. All right, I'm going to pause here because that was just 20 minutes of me throwing out a lot. Questions, comments? Otherwise, we go to show and tell.
Does anyone have a question for the rabbi?
You can challenge something I said too. Okay.
Okay, sounds like show and tell.
All right. So the show and tell I'm going to bring tonight is a ritual that we do on a daily basis, not on a holiday, not on Shabbat, on the Sabbath. It's commanded to us actually 4 times in the Torah, twice in Exodus and twice in the book of Deuteronomy. That we are to take the words of Torah and we're to put them as a sign upon our arms, our hand, and between our eyes. So what does that mean exactly? It's this. So what I'm holding here is a set of tefillin. You might hear about it. If you've read Night, you're going to hear certain things about like tefillin, which sometimes are translated as phylacteries. I have no idea what phylactery means, other than it's something about protective or it's not to be protective. It's nor is it some kind of a talisman of some sort. It is these boxes, which the style of doing tefillin this way, and the best way to translate tefillin is it's prayer items, because the root of the word in Hebrew, we can boil most words down to a 3 or a 4-letter root. And once we have that root, now we know what the word is basically based on or what it's about. And so tefillin has to do with prayer and the things that we wear during prayer. Now, of those 613 commandments, and this is one of those differences between Christianity and Judaism, that in Judaism, we're holding on to all 613. Christianity is going to create this new covenant, right? The Brit Hadashah we talk about in Hebrew, this new covenant, in which case there's 10 big ones. Yeah, we like those 10 big ones. Those are good. Those are 10 of 613. And so there's this commandment that we are to wear these items, these 2 boxes. I turned off my self view, so I have no idea if you can see me or not. All right, great. So there are these 2 boxes and there are these straps. So what happens here? Okay, so, and it's really hard to see it. So you're kind of just going to have to take my word for it, which I know this feels like I'm doing hocus pocus, but so there's this box. This is the one that's going to go on my arm. It's totally smooth. Okay, that's great. This one has divisions. There are these little divisions in between it. Now, when we put it on, this is going to go on. But the very first, well, if I really want to take it to the beginning, when we start our day, if you're going to be observant, or certainly when you go to pray, we cover our heads. This is called, in Hebrew, it's called a kippah, which means a covering. And in Yiddish, it's called a yarmulke. Yarmulke is a funny sounding word, but Yiddish is a combination of Hebrew, German, Polish, a little Russian, some English. That's in, and then it shows up in English, right? Like the word spiel or schmuck or all these really wonderful words. There's a lot of ways to say jerk in Yiddish. I mean, it's just remarkable. Like Eskimos have 1,000 words for, snow or ice. We have like hundreds of words for idiot, jerk, like, anyway. But we're not a judgmental people. No, not at all. So we cover our head. It's customary. It's actually not commanded in the Torah, but the custom is so strong. It's as if it's law, and we do it out of respect of self, respect of place, respect of God. And that's why the word in Hebrew, yarmulke, well, in Yiddish, yarmulke is based on the Hebrew yoreh malka, maybe even the Aramaic, having reverence for or respect or fear even of God, well, of the king, meaning God. Now, even though we know God is without gender, but God has gender-ish things. This is a talit. It's a prayer shawl. Now, sometimes you'll see it. This happens to be very lovely. It's got burgundy stripes. Sometimes they're black stripes. Often they're blue, though. And blue is the Jewish color. Why? Because that's what it says in the book of Numbers, when it talks about there being a thread. You're to wear threads on the corners of your garments. I'm going to get back to the film, but I got to do this whole setup here. So we have these threads on the corners of our garments. Why is that? Well, we're commanded twice, actually, once in Deuteronomy, once in Numbers. One is what's called a Talit Katan. It's a small prayer shawl you wear underneath your shirt. I don't practice this particular commandment. If I did, there'd be little fringes hanging out of the side of my shirt over here. And those fringes, which when Elie Wiesel's talking, remember, he's coming from an Orthodox background, a traditional observant background. And the kind of schools he went to to a religious school, the boys would be wearing the Talit Katan, the small prayer shawl, and the fringes are there to remind us of all of the commandments. How do they do that? All right, follow me with the numbers for a second. There are 8 strings. Again, you're just going to have to take my word for it. When I come to Laurie's class, I have the kids count the strings. It's very exciting. So there are 8 strings, and there are these clusters of double knots. There are 5 clusters of double knots. So if I take 5 plus 8, I get 13. If there are any math teachers, hopefully I'm doing this right. So I got 13. Well, that's nice, because typically when we're responsible for the commandments is when we turn 13. That's what a bar mitzvah is. A son or daughter, bat. Mitzvah is a son or daughter of the commandment. We're responsible for these things. And that's why it feels like, oh, you're an adult in the eyes of the Jewish community. Yes, you are an adult in the eyes of the Jewish community. You can't drive yet because that's a North Carolina issue. But in the eyes of responsibility in Jewish life, now it's on you. Okay, so we got 8 strings, 5 knots, that's 13. Every Hebrew letter has a numerical equivalent. So Aleph is worth 1, Bet is worth 2, Gimel 3, and so forth. So if we get a word in Hebrew, we can find the numerical value by taking the value of each letter. So the word for fringe in Hebrew, tzitzit, adds up to 600. So the value of this word is 600 plus the 5 knots plus the 8 strings. I get 613. So when I go to put this on, as I do, now I'm literally wrapped in the commandments. Ta-da! Okay, I got my head covered. I got my talit on. Now what do? Okay, we're gonna put the tefillin on. So the tefillin on goes on as such. First, we put the one on our arm. Now the one that's on our arm is really interesting because it's a smooth box that I showed you. Why is it a smooth box? Because if I were to crack the bottom of it open, I would find one piece of parchment, and on the parchment, there would be the 4 passages from Torah where we are commanded to put on tefillin, or to put on, take the words of Torah and have them as a sign on our arms and between our eyes. And then, so we got the box here. We've got one piece of parchment on the inside of this box. And then I've got these straps going across my arm. Why did I do that? Well, I'll tell you that in a second. So I have to see though if I did the right number. So I take a verse from the book of Psalms. We get a little superstitious at times. I don't want to count. So I take a verse that has 7 words. And if I've got a strap per word, then I know I've got the right number of straps. So take a line from Psalm 145 and says, Poteach et yadecha umaspia l'chol ratzon. What does that mean? Open up your hand. And God is one who, we're saying God's the one who opens God's hand and provides for all. Well, God doesn't have hands, but we do. So we have to think about how we're using our hands. And so I go, Poteach et yadecha umaspia l'chol chai. Uh-oh, I'm missing a strap. This is when I try to walk and chew gum at the same time. It never works. So Poteach et yadecha umaspia l'chol chai ratzon. Great. So now I've got my 7 straps. We love the number 7. We love the number 7 in Jewish life. It's creation. It's a whole number. You can't break it. We see the number 7 all over the place. For example, don't let it be confusing that we just started our new year with Rosh Hashanah. I got all excited to tell you about that. But according to what's in the Torah, it's on the first. Rosh Hashanah is on the first day of the 7th month. Great. Sukkot is 7 days. Shabbat, of course, the Sabbath is on the 7th day. I could give you others as well. Another time I can tell you why Rosh Hashanah is on the first day of the 7th month and what the first month is. I'm going to put the rest of the strap around my hand. So it looks kind of like that. All right, now I've got this one. Well, this box is the one that I told you had those divisions in it. Why is that? Well, because if I were to crack open the bottom of the box and get the parchments, remember this one on my arm has one parchment with the 4 citations on it. This one, if I were to crack the bottom, has 4 parchments. Each parchment only has one of the citations from where we're commanded to do this. Why? Because as Jews, we are to work as one. We are all together in this. We are to be one people. Trust me, wish that we actually were all the time, though we are often grouped together as one people. And inside of our heads and our minds, we are of multi-opinions, right? You may have heard the expression 2 Jews, 3 opinions. That's true. What's surprising about in Winston-Salem is that we only have 1 synagogue. There used to be 2. But we think about the idea that you have to have 1 synagogue that you pray in and 1 you won't step foot in. Like that's just a given. We know that people are going to disagree. We're going to have multiple opinions. Okay, so that's how this is going to work, which means we're going to have multiple interpretations of Torah. This one says it should be this way. This one says it should be this way. That we allow for that. We take what's left in our hand over here. And I'm going to make the letter shin, which if you don't know Hebrew, then I've just made 3 straps, and that's very nice, I suppose. That's a shin. It represents the holy name of God, El Shaddai, God who is almighty. This one, you're just going to take my word for it again. This is the letter Daled. El Shaddai, Shin, Daled, and the way the knot is in the back of my head over here, it's a Yud. So now I've got God literally represented all around me. Now I'm ready to start my morning prayers. Great, now we pray. What is this all about? What I like to think about this is that to be Jewish and to hold on to the commandments, that it is it's binding. This is clearly limiting my action, right? I mean, I play guitar. It's very hard to play guitar when I have my tefillin on. But it's not constricting. I can still move about. Like, that's fine. Being Jewish, we're bound by things. We have expectations. When every culture has a master story. Sure, the Holocaust is an important story for us. It's not our master story. Our master story is the Exodus from Egypt. If you have a question about Judaism, I'm not kidding you. All right, you can call me on it if I'm wrong, but 75% of the time, just say the Exodus. Just say when the Jews were slaves and they left Egypt. You will be right. Right? Christianity, the master story, I can say this with tefillin on. It's okay. I'm not going to break like any rules. It's Jesus. It's the story of his being born, of his life, but of his death and his resurrection. That's where we as Jews differ, of course, right? We're not going to. He was a Jew who would have known from tefillin. He would have known from the fringes. Absolutely. He would have known of a head covering. He would have known about he would have known from kosher laws, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, all of that. He knew from all of that. Why? Because he was Jewish. Our story is going to stop with the resurrection piece. That's where we're not going to go, and that's what's going to define the difference between a Jew and a Christian, and among other things, but that's a pretty central theological one. So we're doing this to remind us who we are and how we're supposed to live our lives. We were slaves in the land of Egypt. We weren't just led out there to wander around the desert and have a great time in the Sinai, although the snorkeling is very nice. But we go to Mount Sinai where we receive the Torah. Once we have the Torah with all those commandments and the stories and all that goes with it, now we not only know who we are and why we are, but what's expected from us, what the kind of life we're supposed to lead is. So we talk about we're the chosen people. If you've ever seen Fiddler on the Roof, which is important as the Exodus is, the other 25%, maybe 10% of the time, just say Fiddler on the Roof. That's going to get you just fine. And when Tevye says, couldn't you pick on someone else a little while? Like, so what, we're chosen for this? Yeah, no, we're chosen with a unique destiny. It's not that we're better than others. It's just that this is our path to try to understand who we are, what we're supposed to be, what God expects of us, all of that. Other people, they can do what they want. Please just don't bother us. Like, it's enough already with that. But really, this is who we are, and we've been chosen with this destiny, which at times can feel a real burden. And trust me, working with any number of bar mitzvah students, it can feel remarkably constricting and binding in a less than pleasant way. But that's welcome to adulthood too, right? I mean, it turns out we have obligations and responsibilities. And talk about roots in the word in Hebrew, the word for responsibility in Hebrew is achrayut, because the root of that word is acher, thinking about the other person. That's what responsibility is. And while we're just having these, kind of intellectual spasms about how to respond to COVID-19, the Jewish response is really easy. Watch out for each other. What more do you need to know about that? Sorry, this is not a political statement. This is a Jewish value statement. And so when we look in Israel and what the response has been there, everyone was all hot and excited. Well, not everybody, but people were hot and excited to get the vaccine. Why? Well, for a couple of reasons, according to some of my friends in Israel. First of all, because there's a sense of collective responsibility, and you do for the whole. Like, that's just part of the society. Again, I don't want to speak in like that every single Israeli is so fabulously responsible. No, not necessarily. They're humans also. But there's a sense of giving up, doing something that's right for the whole. There was never a discussion in Israel about personal freedom. Wearing a mask has nothing to do with personal freedom. It's uncomfortable, and we'll complain a lot about it, but it's not about personal freedom. The other reason why Israelis love to get a vaccine, because nobody wants to feel like they got left out. You got the vaccine already? Oh, I gotta get the vaccine before he gets it. Are you kidding? There's a competitive factor there. So when we see our challenge as Jews, this literally was my Rosh Hashanah sermon. Our challenge as Jews is this ritual and all this business I just showed you, the holiday, those are our particular things that we do, and they make us seem outsiders. We do things differently. Everyone else is busy going to football games on Friday night. We're celebrating Shabbat. Okay, as a kid growing up, I went to my high school football games, but we did make it to the All-State, which was very exciting in California. So, but I always loved as a kid when it was Rosh Hashanah and it's like Tuesday or whatever, I'm thinking, I don't have to go to school today. Okay, that night I got into a panic because I had homework to do, but I felt different. And to me, at least the family I grew up in, that was treasured. Not to be different for different sake, but to say, this is who we are. We do things differently, and that's okay. Other people can do what they want, just don't bother us. This is who we are, and this helps define who we are. Now, that can go very dark if all you are is concerned about yourself. And we can do that to be tribal to an extreme as Jews. That's not so good either. Some of the reaction to the Holocaust among many Jews has been to go very universalistic and say, we got to take care of all of humanity, right? You might hear a term, tikkun olam, which loosely translates to repairing the earth or repairing the world. It's actually a rabbinic concept that goes back many, many centuries. We use it universally. It might be used for like things like social justice. The danger of going universally entirely is that you're out there marching for pride on Shabbat. Well, that's good. I would embrace that. And I've marched for pride on Shabbat, but that means I'm desecrating my Shabbat. But am I desecrating it if I'm doing something good for other people? It's a real conundrum. And there were Jews who would say, you can't, it's Shabbat. And the others would say, what do you think? What more Jewish thing could I be doing than be marching for civil rights for people? It's a good question. It's a good question. And we try to hold those questions, wanting to embrace what's best for the whole and others, because we have known through the centuries that what it means to not be embraced and to be sought after for murder or assorted other awful things. But we also know we got to take care of one another. There's a whole reason the Torah, one of the explanations we give as to why the Torah starts with Genesis 1 and not Genesis 12, which is the story of Abraham and Sarah and moving forward. Or some would say Exodus 12, which is when we're about to leave from Egypt. We start with Genesis 1 because that's the creation of humanity, right? There's the globe, there's everybody. And then in Genesis 12, we're going to zoom in on Abraham and Sarah. Think Google Earth. We're going to zoom in on Abraham and Sarah, and we're going to just follow that, right? That's our path from that point on. That's our story, but we're a part of humanity also. So that's just, I'll close up the time because now we're at just about time. That's why your teaching the Holocaust is so important, to recognize Jews have historically been other. We've been other, we've been othered. Today in America, we kind of look like a lot of other people, but not necessarily. There's like 15% of American Jews are people of color. So you can't say that Jews are all white, because we're not. Many of us come from that European Ashkenazi world, but go to Israel. Like, you got Jews who are literally from every place in the world, from Ethiopia to Yemen to Iraq. I mean, they don't look so much white. I mean, less than half the population is white. So it's, we have known from otherness and continue to be, and that's, we can get into Israel and talk about that and various things, but that's the time I've been allotted. It looks like I just filled it up, Laurie. So I'm happy if you want to ask some questions. I don't know if I left enough time for questions.
Yes, we actually built in 10 more minutes for questions.
Oh, good. Let me talk.
And thank you very much.
It's an honor.
Yeah. So I'm going to open the floor to anybody. You are welcome to unmute and ask a question, or you can put the question in the chat. And we'll be happy to do that. So I think we have oh, okay. Yeah, so yeah, the book Refugee by Alan Gratz, really a great way to talk about the St. Louis. And of course, he actually has other stories running through that particular book. And thank you for the recommendation there, Lisa, in case people were not aware of that particular text. But that's one we definitely use in Winston-Salem. And I was very glad. My kids love his books, because he also talks about, I think it's a Syrian refugee as well as a Cuban refugee in the book. Yeah. And there's a lot of resources from the museum on the St. Louis. So thank you for mentioning that, Rabbi, because I think
Sure.
that story in particular, a lot of our students just have no idea. And actually a lot of teachers that we've worked with over the years, even through the museum, really did not know the story of the St. Louis. And there were other ships as well.
Yes.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know that either. So
there's also my father's uncle, who I referred to, his family, it's a very long story, but they went to Shanghai in 1939. Shanghai was accepting Jewish refugees. It was a part of Shanghai that was controlled by the Japanese, and you didn't need a visa to get in. And so about 30,000 Jews escaped there. He was there from 39 to 47. And then ultimately he and his father went back to Berlin. They did not have a great relationship. He and his mom came to San Francisco, which is how he ultimately marries my dad's aunt. And then is now part of our family. Yeah.
Oh, cool. All right. What other questions, guys, do we have? Or comments or?
I don't really have a question, but I just want to say thank you for introducing this Czech Memorial Scroll Trust that I now have to go down that rabbit hole and find more about.
I'm going to just, yeah, it's really, really interesting. And they have a museum in Westminster, in the Westminster Synagogue, which is where they're based.
And did you say that was originally Prague?
It was, they found them, I believe it was outside of Prague. It may have been in Prague. I can't remember exactly right now. Yeah,
Okay.
it's that.
I get to go to Prague in the spring. I mean, fingers crossed, I get to go to Prague. So, I mean, if there was any left information over there, I would love to try to find it.
Check on that. And of course, the Prague Jewish community is fascinating. The history there is very rich and very deep. The cemetery is a very famous cemetery to visit and to see. Literally graves stacked upon each other, because that was the reality. But yeah, you'll learn a lot there.
All right, thank you.
There's someone has a hand up, this person. 8 Chris Head.
Hey, first of all, thank you so much for presenting tonight. You know, this is probably my first time ever having a real interaction with a rabbi. All the truth out there, and the way you first of all present and the way you share things was absolutely incredible. So thank you for that. My question is I am a middle school teacher, and some of the drawback and the feedback we get from parents oftentimes is that it's too sensitive, it's too barbaric to teach and things like this. And so what I have actually done, I actually sat on my county's curriculum team over the summer. So I got to take our standards and allocate 7 full days of teaching the Holocaust. And so we do it through almost like a timeline, but we start with Judaism and anti-Semitism. We kind of build upon that. And so one of the major takeaways from the week's lesson is perspectives. You know, obviously we can't teach everything I mean, my goodness. I mean, there's college courses where the entire course is on the Holocaust, and I'm trying to teach middle schoolers, and so when it comes to teaching perspective of anti-Semitism, any areas that you feel would probably be more impactful that we should focus on, or maybe kind of draw a little bit stronger of a light on to kind of assimilate the students into a topic as strong as the Holocaust?
God, I wish I educate and teach, but I'm not an educator. I can write lesson plans, but I can't, at least right off the cuff, give you what I feel like you deserve in a good suggestion. Let me think about it though, Chris. And I really appreciate you bringing that. As far as perspective and on age and what's appropriate, I don't know. But one of my kind of feelings, and I've lived in Israel twice in my life for a year, and I have multiple family and friends who are in Israel. And when I think about when we at Temple will start to teach our kids, what do we do when it's Yom HaShoah, which is the day? And just remember, in Hebrew, the word Holocaust can have a little tricky overtone because it means a burnt offering that is meant as a sacrifice, which from a theological standpoint is a little tricky to stomach. The word in Hebrew we use is Shoah, which means catastrophe essentially, or really just awful devastation. But what's the appropriate age, right? So if I got pictures up on a drop down screen and we're doing some songs, how am I going to frame that if I've got a kindergartner in the room and an 8th grader? So on the first on one hand, I'm probably going to arrange the day so that we're going to have the K through 3 together, and I'm going to have the 4th through 8th together. So that's one of the things, being sensitive to the kids. But I know that my relatives and friends, kids in Israel, when it's Yom HaShoah, there are observances in their schools. It's not a day off. They go to school on that day. And there's an air raid siren in Israel. Everyone knows to expect it. That goes off. In Jewish time, our days begin when the sun goes down. That's based on the creation story. God makes the evening first. So the rabbis say, oh, the day must start when the sun goes down. So when the sun goes down, everyone knows at 8 o'clock at night, the air raid siren is going to go for 2 minutes and everything just comes to a halt. Buses, cars, people stay at home. If you're walking on the street, there's the air raid siren. Everyone knows it's going to happen again in the morning. I believe I can't remember, is it 10 a.m. or 11 a.m.? Everyone knows it's going to happen. It's a remarkable thing. You can find some YouTube videos about it too. Well, those are kids who are 4, 5, 6 years old in Israel. They're having to confront it right then and there. So it's just part of the life. It's how much do we need to tell? Teach to the child, the rabbis teach us. Like, you just know who your audience is. You're going to bring images in with the 8th grade or 7th grade. Like, just be aware. They can handle a lot. Don't over bring them. And I would also say that part of why I like to teach when I'm going to talk about what happened, which is what I just did with you all, but I also want to show the beauty of Judaism. Like, we're not just this thing, oh, we've been targeted, we've been oppressed, No, we're also this like living, thinking, engaging practice and people. That's also what makes us different. We're not just a religion. We're a people as well, which is why you can have some of our most involved congregants are atheists, right? So like, what does belief in God have anything to do with being Jewish? Okay, a lot, but there's more. There's like a whole other part. We're a people. That's why we got targeted. So my family that left out of Germany, they weren't particularly observant. They were Jewish though, that was enough. And so that's our stories. We come from a land, we're a people. We have a lot of culture. Our culture varies from one place to the other. So that's a quick answer, not so quick. But let me think on it, Chris, and I can try to get in touch with Laurie or whatever to think about what's good.
Anybody else have a question?
No, but there's a good, Karen, what you wrote in there about some lessons and teaching by the, yeah, that looks like, I bet that's a good link right there.
Yeah, if you only have 7 days, we have lessons on our website, or 8 days, whatever school week, or if it's a 5-day week. And a lot of those lessons are based on the museum's website and resources and so forth. So
far smarter people than me are working on this. And they are really, they're Holocaust educators. And so
yeah. And we have lessons for middle school and high school. So age appropriate activities. So check those out and let us know if you need anything else with that. Laurie?
Okay, any other questions, guys? We still have 2 minutes. Well, actually, I'll ask one here at the end. Can you talk for 2 minutes about a lot of my students ask about dietary restrictions, and sometimes that comes up in the memoirs that we read. So can you talk anything about like Jewish diet in very brief forms?
Yes, whatever you eat has to taste good. And if it's not, we'll send it back. What can I tell you? I mean, like, no. So when we think about what we can and cannot eat, first of all, eating is a very important thing. But more than that, if we're aware of what we're eating and having to think about that, it's about mindfulness. And it's about, it's this business of, and some of it's based on, look, when our ancestors were putting together, yes, God, I mentioned, was the capital A author of Torah, and yet we have, particularly in the non-Orthodox Jewish world, we look at the Torah standing on 2 feet. One, it's a document of faith. Yes, God wrote it. God gave it to Moses at Sinai. Boom, done. Well, but then we also look at it as a document of history, that it was written by people, more than likely men, for political, social, and economic reasons. Okay, great. So now it's a piece of literature that we can actually analyze and pull apart and wonder and question and compare to other similar works of its era. Great, we can learn more. So when it comes to the dietary laws, which we're going to read in Leviticus and Deuteronomy in particular, If the Canaanites are doing this, bad. We don't want to be like those Canaanites. So here's what we're going to do. It helps to define and distinguish us. And so we're going to look at three main areas when it comes to food. One, we're going to look at the living creatures and what we can do with that. So for example, when it's a four-legged creature, what are the four-legged creatures that we can eat? I'm not going to give you the quiz tonight, but it's cow, goat, sheep. Those are going to be the big three. Why? Because they're available back then, particularly goat and sheep, but they have a certain kind of hoof and they chew their cud. All right, that's nice. If you're not familiar with the idea of these animals have multiple stomachs and they chew, like they spit up a little and they chew it and it goes into another stomach. It's part of the digestive experience. So we might extrapolate from that, ruminate on things, comes from the same idea. You don't just jump into making a decision. You have to look at it. You think about this. How are we living our lives? Okay, that's one piece. What about the flying things, birds and the such? Well, if you pay attention to what's allowed and what's not allowed, is it the same for the four-legged creatures? We don't eat predators. We eat vegetarians. Let's not talk about fish yet. So if that tells us how are we going to live our life, what kind of person are we? If you are what you eat, think about that. And now is for fish. Now we might eat, it depends on the food chain, but they have to have fins and scales. So in North Carolina, yeah, catfish is out. Salmon, tuna, mackerel, they're all fine. Fins and scales, you have to have both. And we also love those fish in particular because they swim in schools. Great, we can play with that and say, because we love education. How nice. But it's just this idea, we want to think about what we're doing. I'm going to give you two other laws real quick, and then I'm going to be out. One is 3 times it says in the Torah, don't cook a kid in its mother's milk. We're referring to a baby goat here, okay? Don't cook a kid in its mother's milk. I literally was just teaching this to a 12-year-old the other day. I said, why do you think that is? And the kid goes, I don't know, it's gross. He goes, it's messed up. I said, that is exactly right, it is messed up. You've got this baby goat that's supposed to be nourished from the mother's milk. And now you have slaughtered this baby and you're cooking it in the substance that was supposed to give it life. That is offensive to the mother in particular. Okay, so we want to just think about that. Don't put them together. Second of all, if you see a mother bird and she's, hovering over her chicks or her eggs, but you want the eggs, shoo the mother bird away, then collect the eggs. Why? Respect the animal. So it's allowed for us to eat these things, but be mindful, be respectful. The word that we use for non-kosher meat is treif. Why is it called treif? Literally, the best translation that I could do in modern English is it's roadkill, right? So if God forbid, a cow gets hit by a car, a cow is kosher meat. It has to be slaughtered appropriately. So it died by a car. No, there's just nothing kosher about that. It's roadkill. So that's how we view things that are not kosher. It's like literally the word means torn up. It's just not suitable. The word kosher means suitable, fit, or appropriate. So we could use it for behavior as well. Is that really kosher behavior? When someone asks me that way, and then we kind of go into eco-kashrut. If I'm buying apples from New Zealand that are being put in plastic containers and shipped by airplane to Los Angeles or here to Charlotte or something, and then trucked to my Costco, really, is that the best environment? It's when I got great apples that are available, especially this time of year, right down the road. Is that really a kosher decision to buy that? Or if I got apples that are being all kinds of pesticides and things on them that are harmful for the water table and the people who are busy farming it, it's probably not kosher fruit, even though fruit on its own is inherently what we call parv. It's neither meat nor dairy. It's good on its own. So dietary are about keeping us distinct. It's also about being mindful about what we're eating. So that's a whole nother topic, but thank you, Laurie. I appreciate that.
Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate you being here with us tonight. And I think all the teachers really have learned a lot as well. And they're telling you that in the chat. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you all for what you wrote.
Yeah.
And there's another question in there from Joyce. Maybe we could send that to the rabbi and he could respond that way, because I don't want to ignore what she wrote in there.
Oh, great. Okay. I always love a good
we'll do that.
That's great, Joyce. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed everything you shared, and I'll be waiting for your response. And I have, of course, a reason for asking those questions.
Great. So Laurie, if you can just kind of get that information together, and then I will get back to you just as quickly as I'm able.
Will do.
Great. Thank you, Karen. Thanks so much also for hosting.
Thank you, Rabbi, for
I appreciate
coming.
it. It's very
We
kind.
appreciate it.
Have a good night, everybody. Thanks for staying awake and being there. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take good care. Thank y'all.
Okay. So we've got Christina coming to kind of piggyback on the rabbi and share the updated resources for us that she and others have worked on very, very hard. And so we're excited to see what we have available for use with our students. So Chris?
Hi, thanks, Karen. The rabbi is going to be a very hard act to follow. So my apologies in advance. I hope I don't put anybody to sleep. So I will do my best to just go through kind of quickly, but just getting our feet wet with some of the resources that we have developed at the museum, knowing that Night and the Diary of Anne Frank are probably the two most taught texts in schools in the United States. And also knowing that we have a very unique archive, and we have staff who have taught about the Holocaust using these books. We pulled together what we know and what we've done to address teaching these two books. So, and I want to thank Laurie in advance. Laurie has always been the master with technology. Since I've known Laurie, she has always helped us. So thanks, Laurie, for running the PowerPoint. So I'm just going to go through a few of the things, keeping in mind too, what you have to do as teachers in North Carolina with your standards, and also thinking about some of the things that the rabbi shared with us about Judaism and Jewish culture. And what he touched on something that I think is really paramount when we are teaching about the Holocaust, and that goes into what we call contextualization, the historical thinking skill of contextualization. And that is, I'm sorry, I'm reading the, I'm just reading what the transcription at the bottom, and it came out to alcohol, which no, he was not teaching about alcohol, he was teaching about the Holocaust. So, okay, so I'm sorry if I didn't, maybe something I said didn't come out correctly, but that's okay. We know it's about the Holocaust. And the important thing is that our students need to understand what existed before in order to understand what was lost. So his going through some of the basics of Judaism and answering questions about culture and customs, whether you have somebody like Elie Wiesel, who started off being very observant, and you had Anne Frank and her family who were maybe not as observant, but definitely fit into different elements of the culture. That's very important. So teaching about what existed before with the culture is really critical to understanding what was lost, in addition to the millions of people who were lost, the culture that was lost with them, and that in some cases may have come back in smaller ways, but never like what existed before. So I think that his talk was really key for understanding that. So on the note of contextualization, if we can go to the next slide.
Yep, got it.
Thank you. Can
there we go.
Is that working? Okay, great. So contextualizing the Holocaust, making sure that before we delve into any particular text, whether we're teaching Night or Anne Frank's diary, that our students understand what the Holocaust was. And I was listening to the comments From some of you that you feel that your students may not have a grasp of this history or understand what it was, and even as adults, sometimes it's not until later in life that we understand it. This is the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum's definition of the Holocaust, and it's our first guideline in our 10 guidelines for teaching the Holocaust. I'm going to give you a minute to read over this definition, and then if you raise your hand, or if Laurie or Karen, you can call on people. If there's anything about this definition that you find striking, or any key words that you see in this definition. The definition is, by the way, included in our lesson plans for Anne Frank's diary and teaching night. So that's why we're starting off with the definition also tonight. Is there any particular part of this definition that you find interesting, challenging, something that you feel you need to focus on more, perhaps? Anything that you didn't know that's in this definition? Or any part of it that might even be challenging, knowing that there are challenges. So Suzanne, you have your hand up.
I think the word murder is not always used when we talk about the Holocaust. You know, we talk about the number of people killed, but I think when you use the word murder, that kind of steps up the level of understanding.
Yeah, and you know, as I was an ELA teacher, I taught high school English for 9 years, and connotation is everything, you know, and understanding tone. So yes, it's to kill versus to murder. And the word murder, why would we use that word murder? Thinking about intent, you know, the intent is really important here. So that word murder says a lot about intent. This was intentional. This was not an accident. State-sponsored, systematic state-sponsored, Christy, getting back to that. Karen, perceived racial or biological inferiority. And as the rabbi spoke about earlier, there were other victims of Nazi persecution. And that is also within the state standards for North Carolina. One of the standards in North Carolina, when you're looking at the standards, is to look at multiple perspectives of various people in the past. That's a world history standard in North Carolina. That's really critical here. The word collaborators. So Carla, or anybody who would like to just contribute to this, why is the word collaborators important?
I think that it's important because once again, it's not a single story of just the Germans being the ones who were culpable for everything that occurred. I mean, we know that there were bystanders. We know that there were other collaborators who participated in that. And I think you need to include all perspectives. And sometimes when we talk about the Holocaust, people simply say the Germans.
Right, and we have to be very careful with terminology. In fact, we have a guideline that speaks to the importance of terminology, to use proper terminology. And this history could not have reached the conclusion that it did with the millions of victims that it did without the role of collaboration. Collaboration took on many forms, and it varied from place to place, from time to time. We have a timeline activity. We have two timeline activities specific to Anne Frank's history and to Elie Busell's history, but we have a general timeline activity that shows the expansion of the war and how collaboration took on a bigger role as the war expanded. So yes, absolutely, you're correct, Carla. What does it mean that the Jews were the primary victims? So this is my colleague, David Clevin, who's asking that. And David, I don't know if you want to jump in, but I want to introduce David. David is my colleague and good friend who works in education initiatives. And he is working very closely with content and instructional specialists. David, I don't know if you want to say a word or two.
Well, I asked that question because I think that it's one that kids often wonder. They hear different numbers of people killed during the Holocaust. And when you start seeing all these lists of people in this definition, the question is, are they all victims of the Holocaust? Are they all victims of the Nazis? What's the difference here? And it's important to be able to discuss intelligently that that Jews were primary victims in the Nazis' eyes. They played a central role in Nazi ideology. And a lot of times people wonder why do people only talk about the Jews so much when they talk about this history? And it's because they were considered by the Nazis as a special group to be targeted.
Targeted for complete
destruction.
Complete destruction. Since they could not, and that goes back to a lot of some of the comments that came up about the St. Louis and understanding the role of immigration, and the fact that before you had the final solution, there was a push to drive them out. It was not, the first intent was not necessarily murder, but to rid Germany, to rid the Third Reich of its Jewish citizens through different means. And that's a whole other lesson. I know we don't have a lot of time, but yeah, David does raise an excellent point, because that's a key question that is often asked by students and by visitors to our museum. Why the Jewish people? Why were they targeted? What were the reasons behind it? And that goes back to some of the questions that came up earlier. We have some resources that look at historical anti-Semitism. David, I don't know if you can put those in the chat. But thanks for doing that. I know we don't have a lot of time left, so that's okay, but we're gonna move ahead. But thank you for your contributions, and I hope that you delve into these even more. So if you could click a couple of times, Laurie, thank you. So contextualizing this history. To teach Anne Frank's diary, you have to understand how it is that she and her family first came to live in the Netherlands, and second, how they came to be in hiding. The same for Elie Wiesel. When you read Night, of course, as a rabbi said, you realize his devotion to Judaism, his devotion to asking questions and trying to understand, and how that devotion starts to change over time because of what is happening to him. So we have to understand the bigger events, and that's also in your state standards as well, contextualization, and understanding how events affect people's lives is very key. So for both of the lesson plans, we have created timelines for Elie Wiesel and for Anne Frank. And I'm going to I have them right here. I'm going to put them in the chat so that everybody can see them. So if you would right now, if you can go to the Anne Frank timeline, it's the second one there. Sorry, I kind of grouped them together, but they're there in the chat. If you can go to the Anne Frank timeline and open that timeline up, just copy and paste or click on it. Laurie, if we can go to the next slide. So I'm going to ask Laurie, if you can click on it, there's a link. Okay, in our lesson plan for Anne Frank, we have this historical film footage, and this actually comes to us from the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam. This is, as far as we know, the only historical film footage, the actual moving imagery of Anne Frank. It's 41 seconds here. I actually included the Washington Post link because I know that the YouTube link that we have in the lesson, sometimes YouTube is not allowed to show, it's not allowed to be accessed in schools. But you can show this to your students. It's only 41 seconds. You can show it a couple of times. And you can ask the students, first of all, if they're not familiar with Anne Frank, explain that she's a teenager who was murdered in the Holocaust, and yet who wrote a diary of her experiences in hiding that has to this day sold over 30 million copies, and it's been translated into 70 languages. And we include that information in the lesson plan for you. If this is the only film footage that exists of Anne Frank, what would we know about her based on this film footage? And this film footage comes from 1941, about a year before her family goes into hiding. If you look at the timeline, the Netherlands has already been invaded, and it's fallen under German occupation. So looking at this historical film footage, and it's might seem odd to students now because somebody mentioned earlier TikTok and how much film footage exists of ourselves in our lives today with our phones. So watching this film, if it's the only record of Anne Frank's life in moving imagery, what would we know about her based on this film footage? And in 100 years, what do you think might exist to help historians learn about your lives or your students' lives now? You can put your question, you can actually raise your hand. We're a small enough group if you want to speak out loud and think about those questions. And Laurie, if you can show the film footage again while we're just contemplating that. What do you know about Anne Frank by watching this film footage? If you knew nothing else about her, what might you know? And there's a reason why we ask this question. When we're analyzing primary sources, as rich as a primary source can be, it doesn't tell us everything that we need to know about a person. And this goes back to the importance of contextualization and the importance of using the timeline activity that we have, plus some of our Holocaust encyclopedia articles and other resources that we have at the USHMM. So it is very worthwhile to show this film footage of her. It was stunning when this film footage was discovered, and that's why you see it written about in a publication like the Washington Post and other publications as well. But it doesn't tell us everything that we need to know about Anne Frank. Just like her diary doesn't tell us everything we need to know about her story. So in the lesson plan, we ask that you reference the timeline activity for Anne Frank to better understand the passages that your students are going to read. So thinking about that, I know we don't have a lot of time, so if we can go to the next slide, Laurie, that's fine. We're going to jump ahead here a bit.
Give me just a minute. I'm getting all.
Okay.
My
sure.
computer's really, really slow tonight. It is.
No worries. No worries.
I'm going to just reshare the PowerPoint because I think it'll be easier.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Laurie. No problem.
Okay.
So I'm putting another link in the chat. And if everybody can go to the link and click on the link. Okay. Give you a few seconds to do that.
Christina, you put two links in there, it looks like.
This one right above, it's the Anne Frank worksheet. You see it, David?
I got it. Yep, I
Yeah.
wasn't all the way down in the chat.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay. Thanks, Lisa, for your comment. Yes, our historians, primarily our historian, Dr. Rebecca Belding, worked on these. She's in Education Initiative. Some of you might have heard her speak. So if we can look at this passage the worksheet from June 20th, 1942. Does everybody have that open? Okay, if we look at that passage from her diary, what do we learn about Anne Frank? And if you scroll down, we have 3 questions that go along with it. What events does she include? Looking at the timeline, if you can have the timeline, I don't know if it's possible, but if you can open up the timeline, the Anne Frank timeline, and then also look at this passage. She writes this passage in June 20th, 1942, just a few days after she receives the diary, actually a few weeks. She's telling us about herself. So we have 3 questions that we ask students. What events does she include and what does she leave out? What do you notice about her description? And how has anti-Semitism shaped her life? So because we're a small enough group, we can just raise your hand. Okay, she includes the marriage of her parents. And if you're an ELA teacher, you could even ask a question about how she feels about both of her parents based on her description. Okay, what else does she include? What does she include that we can take away from looking at the timeline? So what we're trying to do here is again, build up on contextualization of the diary. She talks about her family fleeing. If you look, our lives were not without anxiety since her relatives in Germany are suffering, and that her 2 uncles fled to the United States, which they actually did. What else do we learn about her by looking at this particular entry and matching it with the timeline?
The different restrictions against the Jews.
Yes.
That may have already been mentioned. You could line that up with the timelines perfectly.
It is really, it is very striking if you take certain passages from her diary and you line it up with the timeline. Again, you're providing the content. You're looking at, and again, this goes back to the standards that you have in North Carolina. You're aligning a person's personal experience with the larger context of this history. And so this is giving them a better understanding of the events that lead her family to move to the Netherlands. But yet that's not going to keep them safe. And of course, they could not know that at the time. So what we're doing here is really looking strongly at building context. And I know we don't have a lot of time. I think we only, how much time do we have, Karen?
Just a couple. I mean, we've got until 9 o'clock. So, you know, I just need to say a couple things at the end. But
okay, I'll go through this very quickly. If we can jump ahead to the PowerPoint, and we're going to get to Elie Wiesel. If we can go with the Elie Wiesel, so that would be slide 9. If we can start right there. Thank you. So in the night lesson, the night lesson plan is different from Anne Frank, not for the obvious reasons, not just for the obvious reasons, but when we created the night lesson plan, we really were thinking very strongly about ELA teachers and the needs of ELA teachers. So it has a more of a literary bent to it. We ask very specific questions in there, and we have different assignments in there that go along with the needs of ELA teachers, but we tie it closely together with contextualization. So for example, one of the things that we do in the night lesson plan is we look at Elie Wiesel and how he writes about himself as a dynamic character. He's changing over time. But in order to understand those changes and what drives those changes in his character, we have to understand the historical context and how that is changing him. He's a teenager, he's going through changes that teenagers go through, but at the same time, there's something even bigger, events that are surrounding him in Europe and the world that are also forcing many of these changes. So you will find assignments about that. And one of the first things that we do in the lesson is that we take this quote from the New York Times book review, something that he said that was reported in the New York Times. So you can take a minute to just read this quote. One of the things that we ask you to do with this quote in the lesson is that how does this quote fit the definition of the Holocaust, or what we know the Holocaust to be, and how does this support how he changes over time? I thought this was a very striking quote. I used this actually in my own classroom when I taught night. And this shows the level of marginalization that leads to murder, which takes us back to the definition of the Holocaust. So yes, this shows the systematic nature of the Holocaust. Thank you for the comments that you all are writing in the chat. As Kinsey wrote, he's looking back as himself as a survivor. And you can examine it. Thank you, Kinsey, for what you wrote. He's looking back in time. Anything else about this quote? Okay, so if we can go to the next slide, we're going to just go through this very quickly. And again, reinforcing events in his life, events in the history, and the impact that they have on him. And we ask you at different points to look at the book and how he's changing because of what's happening in history at this time with the war, with the expansion of the war. And that's really important. That takes us back to the definition of how the war expands to include a bigger geography, wider geography of victims as well. So if we can go to the next slide, and I'm just going to finish this off here and to the next one. Well, if we stay on this one for a second, Laurie, just if you can go back very quickly. This one is very important because Moshe the Beadle, he writes about him as mentor. And students need to understand this. If you remember in the book how he goes away, when he comes back, he's trying to warn everybody of what has happened to him. This is what has happened to him. He has been, Moshe the Beadle has been deported from Hungary because he was not Hungarian. And if you look at the third point on this particular card, it includes information about him. So this is why the timeline is so important to reading this book. So if we go to the next slide. One of the things that we do with this lesson plan is we take the preface of the newer edition of Night, and we've pulled these statements, these questions in these statements, and we encourage that your students keep a dialectical journal so that they're actively reading Night. They're not only reading it, but they're recording certain passages in their commentary on those passages. So one of the assignments is to have your students pull one of these questions and then try to answer it from support with the book. And again, this also goes back to ELA standards and the idea of supporting arguments, which is also something now that we see in a lot of history courses too, where students have to support an argument based on evidence, whether it's a DBQ or it's an essay that they're writing. We have these in this particular lesson. So if we go forward a couple of slides, if you can go to the next one, Laurie, thanks. Okay, so if we can just end the night with, or at least this portion before Karen speaks to you, if you can click on the picture, Laurie, we're going to watch a feature that we have on our website We have this special feature. It's a series of short videos. It's titled The Many Legacies of Elie Busell. And one of the things that we look at is his life as a literary craftsman. So Elie Busell is a writer. So it's about 2 minutes long. We can just play it quickly and then we'll be done. Thank you. Or at least my portion will be done.
We're going to try to play it quickly. If my computer decides I use this in my classroom and it's really awesome. So everybody cross your fingers and toes.
Thanks, Laurie.
Yeah. Sorry, my computer just.
If you want, I can play it from mine.
You know what? That might be better because.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
let me stop sharing.
That. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to do that here.
And while they're fiddling that, I can just say we are going to have a program in December on Anne Frank and salvage pages. So it's going to be more in depth. We're going to have a program in February, I think, on night. And again, we'll be using more of these resources and having more information. We knew that Chris was going to give us a great outline of all of those activities. So that's coming up. And Chris, whenever you're ready,
I'm ready. Okay, so I'm going to do a screen share and with the sound. And can everybody see?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. Here we go.
Why do I write? Perhaps in order not to go mad, or on the contrary, to touch the bottom of madness.
Elie wrote beautifully. He really was a craftsman when it came to the use of language, both in the written word and the spoken word. Many of his novels touch on the periphery of the Holocaust, but still deal with it. Night is one of the gems because it does not avoid the horrors, but it places them in a human context, and it does not frighten the reader away.
It's almost inconceivable that one man could have published the number of books that he published. One might have expected his productivity to trail off in those years when everyone wanted him to speak on the great moral questions of our time, but that didn't happen.
Memory means to live in more than one world, to be tolerant and understanding with one another, to accept the mystery inherent in questions and the suspicion linked to answers. Naturally, it can also bring forth tensions and conflicts, but they can then be transformed into culture, art, education, spiritual inquiry, the quest for truth, the quest for justice.
In my 20s, the book I appreciated the most was actually The Accident. You know, here is this autobiographical story of my father dating a non-Jewish woman named Kathleen, of going to the theater, of taking taxi cabs, of experiencing the American medical system. I think as I've moved on, you know, some of the Hasidic stories have gotten much more interesting to me, my father as storyteller.
And I wish people would take a look at those other books because he had a lot to say, in particularly the nonfiction, and the novels are wonderful.
One never knows what to expect in the next line, on the next page. Another catastrophe? Another warning? Another miracle? To read means to open gates and go back to ancient times and bring back ancient experiences.
Okay, so thank you so much. I'm going to put the links to the lesson plans in the chat. But again, good luck to all of you. I hope that we see you in a month from now for the second portion of this workshop. And if you have any questions, please be in touch. I will leave my email address in the chat as well. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Karen. Thank you to the North Carolina Council, and thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Chris, so much. We've learned so much tonight. I know I have, and I hope you all have, and I appreciate you sticking with us for the 2 hours. I just put in the chat the link to the evaluation form that we would love for you to go ahead and fill out whenever it's convenient for you. And when that happens, then I can send you the certificate, or I can keep your certificates for you and send them, you know, at the end of a semester or the end of the school year, however you want to do that. And as like Chris said, we do have part 2 of this program on October 26th from 7 to 9 p.m. We have registration links open for some of our other programs. Our first in-person will be at Lee Holder Center in Kinston. We still have a few opportunities for people to come. Rebecca Erbelding, Dr. Erbelding will be Zooming in and speaking, and she will also be talking with us at the next program in terms of the looking at distortion and myths and misinformation that often prevent high quality Holocaust education. And so we want to kind of get into that aspect of it as well. And we will have a survivor, North Carolina survivor, Suli Shankin will be here with us to help us remember and go forward. And I kind of want to give you a little assignment. I know I'm not really, it's not anything, but if you think you're planning on coming back, you know, we'd like for you between now and then to, you know, think about the stories of the Holocaust, reflect on how this can help transform your learning, right? And think about the learning of your students and meeting your state standards. There's a lot of things, but if you have some ideas for responding and coming back with moving forward, because that's where we want to take it. We need to learn the history. We need to make sure that we know the pedagogy that we need to employ, but we also need to help our students find a way to carry this and put this in their everyday lives if possible. So we're hoping that maybe you do some journaling and reflecting between now and then, and we'd love to see you back. We're going to be, the evaluation form should be up there.
Karen, the link is not working. Or is the evaluation form actually open?
Okay. So it is on the workshop site. Gosh, let's see.
The form, Google form open.
Okay. All right. So we'll have to do that then. Is that what you're saying? Okay. So we'll have to fix that. We'll do that tonight and try to get it up there tonight and get that straight. I apologize for that. Laurie, anything you want to finish up with?
No, I just really appreciate, I mean, like all of us, you guys taught today and you still showed up tonight. And I mean, I've heard the rabbi speak multiple times, but I learned even more tonight. And I really enjoyed seeing the outline for the lessons because I hadn't had time to delve into that yet. So I'm really excited about what the museum has been doing. And we really hope you join us in the second part of this workshop, where we do have the historian from the Holocaust Museum as well as our survivor to finish out our focus here. So thank you for joining us tonight. We will, of course, have this video posted on our website and on our YouTube channel. We'll make sure we get the evaluation information to you, and we'll send you the link to sign up for the second part of the workshop if you can do that. If not, we will record it as well.
Could I add something real quick too?
Yes, Dave.
On Sunday at 2 o'clock, the Holocaust Museum is hosting a live webinar. The Vatican files that were promised by Pope Francis will be going over on Sunday at 2 o'clock. So it's on their website if you want to register and see that.
Cool. Thank you, David. That's really interesting.
It is. And we're just so grateful that we're in partnership with the museum and all of the resources that they have, and they're just always so willing to work with us. So we're very fortunate, and we hope to share everything that we can with you.
It's our pleasure working with you.
Oh, thank you.
Again, I mean, North Carolina, you all have done an outstanding job for decades. Supporting teachers to teach about this. So thank you.
Right.
Thank you, everybody. Good luck.
Good night. Have a good evening and a good rest of your week. And we'll get that link fixed.